bit of snow possible over the North York moors, but for most a dry night and a clear night and a cold night. That blue hue on the map saying the frost is going to become much more extensive. Many places close to freezing on Thursday morning, if not a little bit below. But generally it's going to be a fine day with lots of sunshine. Still a few showers grazing the east coast, a bit more cloud developing in the northwest later on. But for most it will be a sunny day. Temperatures though only 5 or 6 degrees Celsius. Could be some stubborn fog patches, and if the fog does linger, temperatures may struggle to get much above freezing. Frost and fog then, the order of the next few days. But crucially, it's looking an awful lot drier. That's all for now. Bill and Susanna, back to you.
Alex, thanks very much.
Freedom of the press or a threat to society? Is that the right way to put it? Freedom of the press, is it a threat to society?
Yes.
I think is the question I'm supposed to be posing.
Or is it a cornerstone of democracy which should be protected at all costs? That's the question at the heart of the debate over whether laws should be introduced to regulate our newspapers.
Well, after hearing from hundreds of people over the course of a year, Lord Justice Leveson will give us his verdict tomorrow. And Tim Muffet has been to the newsroom of the Independent newspaper, where they're anxiously awaiting that report.
It's an industry that's found itself on its own front pages. Lord Justice Leveson's report into the culture, standards and ethics of the press is imminent. And in the newsroom of the Independent newspaper, there's fear and frustration.
My main fear is that the whole industry will be heavily criticised and people will get the impression that all journalists did bad things, all journalists hacked phones, paid police officers, chased celebrities down the street, did terrible things to the McCanns, etc., etc. And that clearly is not the case.
The Leveson inquiry at London's High Court was set up following the phone hacking scandal at the now defunct News of the World. But it's the whole newspaper industry that's in the spotlight.
At the heart of the Leveson inquiry is the issue of newspaper regulation. Until now, papers in this country have regulated themselves. But should that change? And what would happen if it did?
The result could be a very onerous regulatory system.
Many people believe that self-regulation hasn't worked, has it? And something needs to be done.
I don't really want to have to start calling up somebody and checking whether this is okay and that's okay. Then I've got to wait for their decision, and then I might not like their decision, then I might be able to appeal. I mean, you know, the instantaneous spot, yes, let's do it, let's go for it, which is really what newspapers thrive on, that might vanish, and that would be a real shame.
The situation that has brought us here is being caused by a small criminal minority at a particular newspaper, and I don't think the rest of the news industry needs to be called to account for their misdemeanours.
Surely it's about time that there was a statutory regulatory body looking over papers with the ability to issue fines if they transgress?
No. If you have a statutory body, you leave the press at large in hock to the government of the day. Personally, I wouldn't trust politicians not to meddle. Although they could give commitments now, I wouldn't trust them not to meddle in the future.
One of the most abhorrent things is the hacking of Millie Dowler's phone. Would that have happened, do you think, had there been statutory regulation in place?
There are laws intended to stop people robbing banks, but every day in Britain a bank is robbed. And no matter how much you legislate, if some people set out to break the law, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what degree of regulation you have. Would her phone still have been hacked? I don't know. I don't really see how Leveson can make a difference to that.
The government will decide which, if any, of Lord Justice Leveson's recommendations are enforced. But the British press could be on the brink of an unprecedented shake-up. Tim Muffet, BBC News.
So let's discuss the other side of the argument now. Martin Moore is from the Media Standards Trust, and broadcaster Anne Diamond also joins us from Kidlington in Oxfordshire. Both gave evidence to the Leveson inquiry, and a very good morning to you both. Anne, we'll talk to you in just a moment. Martin, I just want to ask that question, which sort of was left lingering at the end of Tim Muffet's report, which is that if hacking phones was already illegal, how will any more regulation of the press stop something like that happening?
I think the key here is what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that ordinary people whose lives are turned over or who are monstered or who are horribly maltreated by the press have some sort of redress. I think that's the key. And in the past, it's been virtually impossible. It's been very, very difficult to get any sort of fair redress. It's been very difficult for people to challenge enormous, big media corporations. And we need a system that allows them to do that. And we have to make absolutely sure that that system balances their need for some sort of fair redress with the fundamental need for a free press that can report in the public interest. And that's the challenge that Leveson has been given, and he's extremely aware of.
And you had a pretty torrid time at the hands of the press, particularly when you're a breakfast television presenter yourself. And what do you particularly want to see done? There's this big argument about statutory regulation, whether there should be a law, and if so, what kind of law?
Yes, I think most people would say we don't need any change in the law. The laws are already there. The trouble is the journalists haven't been or not all of the journalists have been behaving according to the law. What we want is some sort of statutory underpinning to enforce that law. Yes, I mean, I myself was tabloid fodder some 25 years ago when we had the Press Council, which was judged to be absolutely toothless. Then it was replaced by the Press Complaints Commission, which again has turned out to be utterly useless. And I think the argument that most of us would reasonably put forward is that self-regulation has been given its chance and it hasn't worked. And now we need some real teeth. And the only way to have real teeth behind maybe an agreed code of conduct is to actually have some sort of statutory underpinning.
And I just wonder, if you look back at the way that you were treated and some of the stories that emerged about you, papers running stories with headlines which were very distressing for you, offering your nanny £30,000 for a story, sending a reporter to pose as a doctor in the hospital where you give birth. Just explain for us how you think that the sort of changes you would like to see would prevent those things happening, or would they not prevent them but give you some avenue to pursue after they emerge?
Well, a little bit of both, actually. And I'm not sitting here as a whinging celebrity. 98% of the evidence that Lord Leveson heard was not about being a celebrity at all. It was about the ethics, behaviour, the culture of the press, which will pursue anybody, famous or otherwise, to sensationalise and sell newspapers. That's what it's all been about. And I think, yes, what you need is to change the culture and an enforcement of those rules. Newspapers knowing that ultimately, they might even have their newspaper taken off them if they continually and barefacedly flout the law, ultimately that could happen to them, will change the culture. And also, if ordinary people who have been victimised by the press, who've been monstered by the press, can actually appeal to somebody, to a body that really is going to do something. Because up until now, you can be monstered, you can be libelled, you could be vilified, and the only redress you've ever had is through the courts, which most people can't afford at all. Or through the Press Council, where you've got some tiny little apology the size of that on page 23 when you were initially monstered on the front page.
Yeah.
We've just got to have a better system.
OK, Martin Moore, when you have, on the day before national publication of the report, a cross-party group of MPs and peers, 86 of them, warning the Prime Minister about statutory control of the press, that shows, one, that there's perhaps not that great an appetite for big change in terms of the law within Parliament. Also, pressure on the Prime Minister himself next time an election comes round.
Well, it's clearly a very divisive issue. I think, in one sense, I'd agree with these MPs in that none of us want state licensing. I think that's absolutely off the table. Certainly, it was in the terms of reference of Lord Justice Leveson that he had to support the integrity and freedom of the press. But we carried out a poll last week. We commissioned YouGov to carry out a poll of over 3,600 people. And we asked them very directly. We said, would you prefer to have an independent regulator established through law, or would you prefer to have a body established by the newspapers? And it was unequivocal. 79% said they would like to have an independent body established by law.
All right. Martin Moore from the Media Standards Trust and Anne Diamond, thank you both very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
7:30. Sally's got some very interesting pictures of one Freddie Flintoff, or we don't really call him Freddie Flintoff, do we? Andrew Flintoff, preparing for a heavyweight boxing career. So, the cricketers, you've never seen him before in a couple of minutes.
He's 4.5 stone lighter, apart from anything else. Time now to get the news, travel and weather where you are. We'll see you in a moment.
Hello there, good morning. One of the alleged victims of sexual abuse by the late MP for Rochdale, Sir Cyril Smith, is planning to take legal action against the council. 8 men had accused Sir Cyril, who died 2 years ago, of abusing them as teenagers at a boys' hostel in the 1960s. Both Greater Manchester Police and the Crown Prosecution Service have said if Smith had been accused today, he would be charged and prosecuted based on the evidence of those who've come forward and spoken out.
I think they will be pleased and satisfied that it's now finally come to light and that people are well aware that Sir Cyril Smith sexually abused them and that they can stand with their heads held high, really, in terms of getting the facts out there that they were abused by this man.
Well, you can hear the latest news on that on BBC Radio Manchester this morning at 8:05. The father of a man who's been missing from his home on Merseyside for over a week has made a heartfelt plea for him to come home. Tom Burns from Kirkdale was last seen after returning from his job at a bar in Liverpool. He then disappeared, leaving his phone and wallet at home.
Friends of the family, friends of mine, friends of Thomas, everyone you can think of, just out there doing all they can. They're out searching, they're out putting posters up, they're on Facebook, they're doing Twitter. Anything they can do to help. We're all sick, we worry over it really, and just want them home really.
Residents in rural Lancashire who've laid their own cables to improve internet access are starting to link up their first homes to broadband. Families in 8 villages in the Forest of Bowland began digging a 40-mile trench earlier this year. They wanted access to broadband in areas not supplied by commercial operators. Manchester United fans will march towards Old Trafford tonight for the game against West Ham to mark the 20th. Now it's time for the weather. It's turning colder but drier. Here's Sally.
Good morning. Well, it's a much calmer picture today and a drier picture at that too. But of course, the theme continues. It will be bright and breezy, but it will be on the cold side too. And we can see on the pressure chart at the moment, relatively calm conditions, but the isobars are still quite close together. That brings those breezy conditions through the rest of today. But brighter picture, some sunny spells allowing for through those clouds through the day. Your temperatures though, well, at best up to around 5 or 6 Celsius. So a really cold feel with that northerly breeze. The winds will ease into your evening and overnight tonight, and we will keep quite a lot of clear skies. So a widespread frost expected with those lighter winds. Temperatures widely around about the freezing mark overnight tonight, if not a touch below. And it remains cold through the coming week.
Now, travel news. There are no trains at the moment between Lancaster and Skipton. There are replacement buses instead, and we're told it's adding about an hour to journeys on that route. On the roads, Blackburn Road at Accrington's closed because of a police incident, and still 1 or 2 roads affected by flooding in parts of Merseyside and Cheshire this morning. That's it for now. We're back again just before 8 o'clock.
Morning, this is Breakfast with Susanna Reid and Bill Turnbull.
Good morning. Our main news this morning, a consultation on setting a minimum price for each unit of alcohol sold in England and Wales will be unveiled by the government later.
Part of a bid to curb binge drinking and reduce alcohol-related violence, ministers are expected to set a minimum price of between 40 and 50 pence per unit, with many health campaigners arguing a higher tariff would save more lives. The proposals could also mean the end of cheap supermarket deals.
Hundreds of families had to spend the night away from their homes last night because of flooding, but forecasters say the weather is now expected to ease. There are 2 severe flood warnings in Wales, as well as 170 flood warnings and 182 alerts for both England and Wales. One evacuation centre stayed open last night in St Asaph, with local supermarkets donating clothing and medical supplies.
David Cameron will receive his copy of the Leveson report on the press at lunchtime today, 24 hours before the details are made fully public. Lord Justice Leveson's been asked to produce a list of recommendations for regulating the press more effectively in the wake of the phone hacking scandal. It's widely expected to introduce some statutory control, but a cross-party group of more than 80 MPs and peers has written to 2 national newspapers today, warning the Prime Minister against making new laws. In just over half an hour's time, we'll talk to the actor Hugh Grant, who appeared at the Leveson inquiry and has been campaigning for stricter press regulation.
More building should take place on open countryside to solve the housing shortage. That's the view of the Planning Minister, Nick Boles. He says the area of England used for development should increase by 1/3 over 20 years. Mr Boles said open land would be built on in exchange for commitments to defend greenbelt spaces. And he's called for beautiful housing, sensitive to its local area.
Rail commuters in England will find out today about changes to the cost of their season tickets for next year. The Prime Minister announced a cut in the planned increase last month, but on average fares will still go up by 4.2%. Some fares expected to rise by nearly 6%.
New guidance is being issued for councils, for schools and for employers to encourage more of us to make those short journeys on foot or by bike. The health regulator NICE wants organisations to support cycle hire schemes, car-free days and the creation of walking routes to tackle what it's calling the silent epidemic of inactivity.
And in Australia, Bondi Beach was closed because the sea turned red with algae.
And it's at Clovelly Beach nearby, and it's closed today. The New South Wales Office of Water is looking how this algae appeared. It's thought it could cause swimmers skin irritation. You wouldn't want to swim through that, would you?
Also, temporary irritation as well. You go in, you come out red.
And probably not good for animals either.
No.
Those are the main stories this morning, 7:36. Sally is here with some extraordinary pictures of the man we used to know as the cricketer, Freddie Flintoff.
Andrew Flintoff. I'm going to show you this quick. I don't know if we can show you this picture in this morning's newspaper of Andrew Flintoff looking a bit skinny. Going to fight as a heavyweight this weekend, Friday. He's lost 4.5 stone.
4.5 stone?
To get to his fighting weight. We've got a little interview with him coming up in the bulletin in just a moment's time.
Yes.
But I'm going to start talking about Harry Redknapp.
Yeah.
Because what a great boss Harry Redknapp looks like he is. Looks like he makes you feel fantastic when you see him in the morning. Puts his arm around you. Already praised the spirit
like
of
our
his
boss.
place. Yeah, very similar. Very similar to our own dear boss watching at home this morning. Hello. Harry Redknapp has praised the spirit of his players as he took charge of Queen's Park Rangers for the first time at Sunderland. It was Darren Bent was in the stands as Aston Villa climbed out of the relegation zone with victory over Reading. Christian Benteke's led. The referees union says Mark Clattenburg has interpreted yesterday's statement from Chelsea as an apology after the club said it regretted how they handled their complaint against him. In the Scottish Premier League, Inverness Cally Thistle have gone level on points with Celtic at the top of the division after beating Aberdeen 3-2. Motherwell beat Dundee United, while Ross County drew 0-0 with St Mirren. The head of British Cycling says Chris Froome is likely to be their lead rider at next year's Tour de France. Froome supported Bradley Wiggins in this year's Tour and finished second. He also won bronze at the Olympic time trial. Wiggins will instead target victory at the Giro d'Italia. England's women have beaten world champions New Zealand again in their Rugby Union Test series. England won the second of the three-match series, 17-8, in Aldershot last night. Now, as we mentioned just a moment ago, the former England cricket captain Andrew Flintoff was regarded as an all-rounder in his playing days, but his latest career move has taken him into a different sport. England's Ashes hero will step into the ring to box professionally for the first time on Friday against the American Richard Dawson. He's being trained by Barry McGuigan, who you can just see there. Flintoff has been criticised for not taking the sport seriously, but he says his preparations have been really tough.
I think the past 4.5 months have possibly been the hardest I've ever had. You know, with the cricket, I did it since I was 6. It was a natural thing to do. And I think when you do something as a kid, you know where you are, but you've got experiences to draw back on. With the boxing, you know, at 34 going into it has been tough. The diet, the discipline, the training, getting punched.
Yeah, I imagine getting punched is
it's probably the worst
pretty
bit.
Hard work. Wouldn't like it myself.
Yes, it's the worst thing about boxing.
Yes.
All right, thanks very
See you
much.
later.
Thanks very much indeed, Sally. Yesterday we told you about Ofsted's annual report, which found a completely unacceptable, quote, gap in educational standards across England.
For the first time, the Education Watchdog published a league table ranking local authorities according to how well their schools have performed.
So, will the move improve standards, and what do you do if your local authority ends up at the bottom of the league table? Let's talk to Taran Kapoor, who is head teacher at 3 academy schools, and Councillor Martin Rawson is from Derby City Council, excuse me. So the key thing for you both here is that, Taran, your schools are in Trafford.
Correct.
And Trafford was in the top 5
That's right.
of the schools which had good or outstanding schools across the country, whereas Martin, Derby in the bottom 5. Now, that means that only 43% of the pupils in the area where you work are at good or outstanding schools. Less than half. What are you going to do about that?
Well, the information is based on information correctly, up to the 31st of August. And I've been in post now since May, when control of Derby City Council changed to Labour, and we've been making really good progress in terms of improving standards in schools.
Right, so things are getting better, but how did you get yourself in that position in the first place?
There's a number of things really that make for effective schools, in terms of the leadership of the head and the senior management team. Teaching and learning really are the key ingredients in schools that make the difference.
Well, those are the key things for schools, and you'd think that schools would be, getting it right more often. Teaching, learning, good teachers. What's gone wrong?
Yeah. Over a period of time, I think that those standards in some schools in Derby haven't been as good as they should be. The City Council is working to support those schools, and we're also taking action where those standards aren't rising quickly enough.
And one answer may be, Taryn, in the fact that academies, and you're in charge of 3 of them,
correct.
The academies have had an additional £1 billion spent on them by the Department of Education, money which has come from main schools' budget and other budgets. So you could argue that schools in Derby are suffering because schools, well, not directly, but academies are feeling the benefit.
You could also argue that we're actually in the business of supporting other schools. I think gone are the days where the local authorities have all the expertise, and people don't always want to be told what to do. They like to be shown.
Are you better resourced at your academies than similar ordinary quote?
Not really, because we were a foundation school, so we were fairly autonomous anyway, and we buy back many of our local authority services because we're an outstanding local authority, and 12 of the 18 secondary schools are outstanding. That's because we work together. The teachers, the head teachers, we actually look to support each other, and now we actually look to support other local authorities because they've begun to realise that they don't always have the expertise. And if you don't know what good and outstanding looks like, you don't know. So what we do is we try and show people as opposed to tell them, because telling people is really easy. Showing them, modelling it, getting in where it hurts, sorting the behaviour, working with teachers who are finding it difficult. That's how you change schools.
Yeah, if we look at the top 5, Marcin, I mean, for instance, in Trafford, 90% of pupils attend a good or outstanding primary, which is such a contrast. And children and parents in Derby must think, how come we live in an area where we have such a lower chance of going to a really good school?
I think one of the issues is the ability that the local authorities got to support schools. And we published our draft budget yesterday, and we're being forced into making £20 million worth of cuts by the government in the coming year.
Do you think you're disproportionately affected compared to other councils?
I do, yes. We've been running the Fair Deal for Derby campaign. We've got about 12,000 signatures that was presented by our MP Chris Williamson to Parliament yesterday.
So when parents and pupils say, why don't we have a good school locally, you are just going to say to them, we don't have the money to provide you with one?
No, we've got very high aspirations for our children and young people, and we want all our schools to be good or excellent. Right. But you do have to take into account the difficulties that we are having in terms of funding from the government to be able to support our schools.
Taryn, is it all about money?
Good local authorities know they're running down the service, so what they've done is they've invested in the schools, in the people, as opposed. It's not all about money; it's about people. And where they've lost advisors.
How do you invest in people?
Well, we're a teaching school as well, and therefore we're charged like a teaching hospital to train the new generation of teachers, make sure that what we produce is outstanding. When we work with other people, we show people what outstanding is, and the local authorities support us to do that. They don't need a great deal of money to do that. And I suppose the additional money we have as an academy and a teaching school, that's our responsibility.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Good luck. Thanks very much indeed.
14 minutes to 8.
Let's update you then on our main news here on Breakfast. Bans on discount alcohol due to be unveiled by the government today in an effort to curb binge drinking and tackle public drunkenness in England and Wales.
David Cameron will receive his copy of the Leveson report on press standards at lunchtime today, 24 hours before the details are made public.
Let's find out what the weather's doing. Here's Alex. Morning, Alex.
Good morning. A bit of a shock to the system for many this morning because the sun is shining across large parts of the UK. However, it is on the cold side. But thankfully, the heavy and persistent rain is disappearing. So cold with sunny spells, that's the theme for most of us through the day today. Has been some heavy rain through the night though. Most of the wet weather's cleared. This is the radar. I've been showing it for the past few days. Much of the UK has been covered. Last night we just really focused across northeast England. These showers have continued to feed. And Susanna.
Alex, thank you very much.
Official figures out later this morning are expected to cast a light on how many people are taking part-time or temporary work because they have little choice, the so-called underemployed.
Yeah. Susanna Streeter is with One Business to find out more, mixing things up this morning. Morning.
Good morning. Yes, I'm in the mixing room here at Hilton Herbs, and here are some of the ingredients that are going to be going into the products. This is dried artichoke, and next to it here we've got some dried bilberries, and these will be put into a supplement for mainly horses, and that's what this company does from this very small farm in Somerset. It now exports supplements for mainly dogs, cats and horses to 41 countries right around the world. But this time last year it was a very different story. The owners, Hilary and Tony Self, were forced to make a difficult decision, weren't you, Hilary? What did you have to do?
We had to ask the staff if they'd be prepared to cut back on their hours so that we could make savings to costs.
Because you were struggling with the lack of orders in the downturn. What did that cutting back on staff hours allow you to do?
It enabled us to really focus on our exports, to use the money to be able to go over and do shows and build our export trade. And it worked. It's fantastic. And we were able to do really well, and ultimately the staff went back onto their full-time hours.
Brilliant. So for you, part-time working has been very successful, allowed the company to be very nimble and turn the business around. But for many other people, they say they're stuck in part-time work with no prospect of getting full-time positions. Here's one story from Penny Cook.
Administrator, coordinator. I'm Penny Cook, I'm 23, I'm from Romford, and I've been looking for a job ever since I finished uni at the end of May. I've applied for up to 40 a day, and it's over 200 at the moment. I've been working in a part-time job, which I've done the whole way through uni. I've asked for extra hours, but they have none. It's really depressing to still be in retail in a job that I could have done when I left school. I thought when I graduated that there'd be a lot more doors open to me, especially with a first degree. I thought I'd be cherry-picked. I like to think that the dream job's still out there and it's possible and that I'd be able to find it and get it, but you wonder how long it's going to take, and you just hope that someone can see the potential and give you the chance.
So very depressing there for Penny, who says she just feels as though she's stuck in a part-time job. Nigel Costley is here from the TUC. Nigel, you're really concerned about this, the number of people who really feel as though they will never get a full-time job.
Yes, well, the economy is still in the doldrums, and although there was some relief that unemployment hasn't risen even higher than it has, what's masking that is the degree of underemployment. Around 3 million people now working part-time, and they're searching and need full-time work.
However, companies like this one, we've heard how useful it is for them to go for part-timers, reduce people's hours so that they can expand.
This was a very pragmatic decision based on trust, and it's been a great success. But for many people who are desperately searching for full-time work, this underemployment is really causing a problem. And what we're seeing is a rise in in-work poverty. These are strivers, people who are searching for full-time work. They're getting whatever jobs they can, part-time work, but it's not paying the bills. So it's a waste of their talent, and it is really hiding the real problems in the economy.
OK, Nigel Costley, thanks very much. Well, we're getting more of a snapshot about how many people are being forced to work part-time, or perhaps who are choosing to work part-time, in some official figures released a bit later this morning. So that will give us more idea about whether part-time work is a help or hindrance to the economy.
Yeah. All right, Susanna, thanks very much. Susanna Streeter reporting.
Now he's the equivalent of fashion royalty, the Italian king of couture who's dressed princesses, first ladies and Hollywood icons. Now Valentino's 50-year career being celebrated at a special exhibition in London.
With more than 130 handcrafted dresses on display for the first time in the UK. So Breakfast Sophie van Bruggen has been to Somerset House for a preview.
On Show and Up Close, a collection of Valentino's iconic dresses worn by some of the world's most famous women, from the couture catwalk, private commissions and a few Oscar winners.
The black one is the Julia Roberts dress.
Beautiful.
Then she got the Academy Award in, what was, 92. When you design, maybe I used to do 30, 40 drawing in one day, choosing the material, and they were all around me, putting the material on top of the girl to see the effect of the light, and the dress was designed.
Valentino's career started in the 1950s, and during that time he's made creations for the likes of Audrey Hepburn, Grace Kelly and Jackie Onassis. Although he retired in 2008, there are still a few names he'd love to dress.
Kate Middleton or the Queen?
Kate Middleton is the dream. She's so beautiful. She has such a, you know, I would choose, I don't know how many dresses they would be beautiful on her. It's not difficult, you know, when you have their size.
There are over 130 handcrafted dresses in this exhibition, but perhaps one of the most breathtaking is this wedding dress designed for Princess Marie Chantal of Greece. It took 25 seamstresses over 4 months of solid work to create. There were concerns that the dresses wouldn't look quite the same without their famous counterparts.
This is Jackie Onassis' wedding dress, one of many significant couture outfits in this exhibition. When we first started, we were very daunted about the prospect of staging such significant pieces, but as you can see, it still remains very much a wedding dress that belonged to one woman.
Some of the dresses date back to the 1950s, but many of the designs are seeing a renaissance in today's fashion.
Well, I think right at this moment there's a complete resurgence of the idea of dressing up, the idea of party dresses, ball dresses, something really special. And it's in the high street, you know, from the cheapest price to medium price. And I think you can trace that back to Valentino, who really was the original jet set designer.
And for the visitors, well, they'll get a rare glimpse into the wardrobe of the rich and famous. Sophie Van Bruggen, BBC News.
Well, that display at Somerset House opens tomorrow and runs until the beginning of March.
Coming up later on Breakfast. She's an American soul singer who's been compared to Dusty Springfield and Aretha Franklin. Her name is Christina Train. She'll be here. She'll be performing some of her wonderful music live for us today.
She has a glorious voice.
She does, doesn't she?
Time now, though, to get the news, travel and weather where you are. See you in a moment.
Hello there, good morning. The family of the late politician Sir Cyril Smith say they're deeply saddened by the claims he sexually and physically abused young boys in the 60s. 8 men had accused Sir Cyril, who died 2 years ago, of abusing them as teenagers before he became MP for Rochdale. Both Greater Manchester Police and the Crown Prosecution Service have said if Smith had been accused today, he would be charged and prosecuted on the evidence of those who've come forward.
And I think they will be pleased and satisfied that it's now finally come to light and that people are well aware that Sir Cyril Smith sexually abused them and that they can stand with their heads held high, really, in terms of getting the facts out there that they were abused by this man.
You can hear the latest news on that on BBC Radio Manchester this morning at 8:05. The father of a man who's been missing from his home on Merseyside for over a week's made a heartfelt plea for him to come home. Tom Burns of Kirkdale was last seen after returning from his job at a bar in Liverpool. He then disappeared, leaving his phone and wallet at home. A man's been charged with the murder of an 84-year-old at Milne Row near Rochdale. The body of Vincent Kershaw was found at a house last month. A post-mortem found he died from head injuries. Residents of rural Lancashire who've laid their own cables to improve internet access are starting to link up their first homes to broadband. Families in 8 villages in the Forest of Bowland began digging a 40-mile trench earlier this year. They wanted access to broadband in areas not supplied by commercial operators. On North West Tonight this evening, we continue our look at poverty in the region and feature a charity which puts surplus food to good use. Liverpool Fair Share persuades companies to give them their excess and they then give it to people in need. It's currently helping to provide breakfast for 100 children at Springwell Park School in Bootle. Staff there say it's had great results.
Well, a lot of our children were coming to school quite hungry, and then if they're hungry, they're not able to concentrate in class. So we found since having the free school breakfast club that the children are ready to learn when they come into class because they've had a good breakfast.
Now time for the weather. Here's Sally.
Good morning. Well, it's a much calmer picture today and a drier picture at that too. But of course, the theme continues. It will be bright and breezy, but it will be on the cold side too. And we can see on the pressure chart at the moment, relatively calm conditions, but the isobars are still quite close together. That brings those breezy conditions through the rest of today. But brighter picture, some sunny spells allowing for through those clouds through the day. Your temperatures though, well, at best up to around 5 or 6 Celsius. So a really cold feel with that northerly breeze. The winds will ease into your evening and overnight tonight, and we will keep quite a lot of clear skies. So a widespread frost expected with those lighter winds. Temperatures widely around about the freezing mark overnight tonight, if not a touch below. And it remains cold through the coming week.
Now, there are still no trains between Lancaster and Skipton. Replacement buses there instead, which we're told is adding about an hour to journeys. On the roads, Blackburn Road at Accrington shut because of a police incident. That's it from me for now. I'll be back with more for you in half an hour's time. See you then. Bye-bye.
Hello, this is Breakfast with Susanna Reid and Bill Turnbull.
An end to cheap alcohol. The government proposes a minimum price in England and Wales for the first time.
Controversial plans to charge at least 40 pence per unit aim to cut crime and hospital admissions.
Good morning. It's Wednesday, the 28th of November.
Also this morning, the misery continues for hundreds still affected by floods.
2 severe flood warnings remain in place here in the St Asaph area in North Wales. Water is still being pumped from affected properties.
David Cameron receives his copy of the Leveson report into press standards today. We'll be asking campaigner Hugh Grant what he wants from it.
In sport, Harry Redknapp took charge of Queen's Park Rangers for the first time last night.
Lies lurks a man's obsession for the truth.
She's known as La Légende in France. The actress Charlotte Rampling and her son Barnaby reveal what it was like working together on her new film.
Jason Donovan's going to be here this morning talking about working with Liam Neeson and Jeff Wayne on a new version of The War of the Worlds.
And as new guidelines are launched to encourage people to become more active physically, we're talking to a woman who took up walking to lose weight and gained an entirely new perspective on life.
And Alex has the weather.
Good morning. A dry day for many today. There'll be some sunshine as well. However, it is on the cold side. A full forecast at 1:15.
Alex, thanks very much.
Good morning. First, our main news this morning. A consultation on setting a minimum price for each unit of alcohol sold in England and Wales will be unveiled by the government. It's part of a bid to curb binge drinking and reduce alcohol-related violence.
Ministers are expected to set a minimum price of between 40 and 50 pence per unit, with many health campaigners arguing that a higher tariff would save more lives. The proposals could also mean the end of cheap supermarket deals.
The days of cheap supermarket booze could be numbered. The government looks set to introduce a minimum price in England and Wales for each unit of alcohol and a ban on multi-buy deals.
Well, obviously we don't know exactly what the price per unit is going to be.
The aim is to curb dangerous binge drinking, but some supermarkets say ordinary shoppers will pay the price.
This is all about customers for us. And this really, the idea of putting a minimum unit price on alcohol is going to punish the majority of our customers that drink responsibly, just to try and affect the behaviour of a small amount of people who misuse alcohol.
Not everyone agrees there is a link between the price of alcohol and levels of harmful drinking, but most public health experts argue a minimum price is the best answer.
This won't penalise the moderate drinker. They may pay 20 or 30 pence a week more, no more than that. But for that small amount of money, they'll see less antisocial behaviour in their communities and less beds being taken up in their hospitals blocked by people who've developed alcohol problems, which could have been avoided.
Generally speaking, people do seem to be drinking less. Overall alcohol consumption has fallen in recent years. But there are some who are still drinking at dangerous levels, older, wealthier people, for example, and they seem to be drinking more than ever. So the real test of the government's policy will be if it can reduce dangerous drinking even in these groups. Dominic Hughes, BBC News.
Hundreds of families have again been forced to stay away from their homes overnight because of flooding. There are currently 2 severe flood warnings for Wales for the River Elwy, as well as 170 flood warnings in place across England and Wales. The forecasters, though, say the worst of the heavy rain has now passed.
Well, yesterday the body of an elderly woman was pulled from a flooded house in St Asaph in North Wales. Our reporter Reen ap Iorwerth is in St Asaph for us this morning. So Reen, tragedy yesterday. What prospect for those hundreds of people who couldn't stay in their homes overnight for going home?
Well, they may be away from their homes for some time. Such was the seriousness of the flooding here in St Asaph yesterday. You can see the fast-flowing River Elwy behind me. Still 2 severe flood warnings on the river in this area. This part of North Wales, what a beautiful picnic area by summer. We see the picnic tables here that yesterday were submerged in water. Some 14 feet of water breached these flood defences here in St Asaph yesterday when the water was at its highest, and you can see these homes behind me here, the water in front of them still being pumped away by high volume pumps that have been operating all night, operated by the rescue services that have been here ever since the flood waters came yesterday. Many of these houses here have been flooded. We heard the sad story, as you mentioned, of the elderly lady being found in her flooded home. It reminded me of a man during the floods in Ceredigion earlier this year who was angry at the fire and rescue services for breaking a window into his caravan whilst they were searching for people. I think what we've seen here in St Asaph shows how important it is that every property is searched, and that has been going on all night. We saw a boat arriving back at the fire and rescue centre here in the centre of St Asaph about an hour ago. Around 180 homes, we understand, still without power. Many people, not just here but across Wales and England, still affected and still concerned. Over 170 flood warnings in place, over 180 flood alerts. So whilst the weather is better, we're actually even seeing some blue sky here in St Asaph this morning. Well, the dangers are still there.
All right, Reen, thanks very much indeed. Reen ap Iorwerth reporting from St Asaph.
David Cameron will receive his copy of the Leveson report on the press at lunchtime today, 24 hours before the details are made fully public. Lord Justice Leveson's been asked to produce a list of recommendations for regulating the press more effectively in the wake of the phone hacking scandal. It's widely expected to include some statutory control, but a cross-party group of more than 80 MPs and peers has written to 2 national newspapers today warning the Prime Minister against making new laws.
That view is not shared by the presenter Anne Diamond. She gave evidence to the Leveson inquiry, and speaking on Breakfast this morning, she said things needed to change.
I myself was tabloid fodder some 25 years ago when we had the Press Council, which was judged to be absolutely toothless. Then it was replaced by the Press Complaints Commission, which again has turned out to be utterly useless. And I think the argument that most of us would reasonably put forward is that self-regulation has been given its chance and it hasn't worked. And now we need some real teeth. And the only way to have real teeth behind maybe an agreed code of conduct is to actually have some sort of statutory underpinning.
And Diamond, in a few minutes, we're going to be speaking to the actor Hugh Grant, who's been campaigning for stricter press regulation.
More building should take place on open countryside to solve the problem of the housing shortage, according to the Planning Minister Nick Bowles. He says the area of England used for development should increase by a third. Mr Bowles says open land would be built on in exchange for commitments to defend greenbelt spaces, and he called for beautiful housing that was sensitive to its local area.
These remarks will cause widespread alarm among campaigners. They fear protection for the open countryside is about to be significantly reduced. The Planning Minister says 9% of England is currently built upon. He thinks that could increase to about 12% over the next 20 years, adding 1,500 square miles of development, an area more than twice the size of Greater London.
We're saying very clearly that we're going to protect the Greenbelt, we're going to keep the Greenbelt, but people, if they want to have housing for their kids, if they want to have people able to bring up their kids in a small house with a garden, they've got to accept that we've got to build more on some open land.
The Planning Minister said over time England will need another 1 million or 2 million houses, but he's called on developers to raise their standards. Too many ugly estates have, he said, been bolted on to towns and villages in recent decades. The government is hoping that a new wave of house building will help to revive the economy. But if the new homes are to be built in open countryside, ministers can expect plenty of resistance. Mike Sargent, BBC News.
Rail commuters in England will find out today about changes to the cost of their season tickets next year. The Prime Minister announced a cut in the planned increase last month. But on average, fares will still go up by 4.2%. Some fares expected to rise by nearly 6%.
Bondi Beach in Australia was closed yesterday because the sea turned red with algae. Clovelly Beach, which is nearby, is still closed today. The New South Wales Office of Water is looking into how it happened, but it is thought the algae could cause some swimmers' skin irritation.
And thousands of people, many of them wearing wizard hats and false ears, have gathered in the capital of New Zealand, Wellington, for the world premiere of the film The Hobbit.
It is the first in a new trilogy of films by Peter Jackson, and it stars the British actors Martin Freeman, who plays Bilbo Baggins, and Andy Serkis is Gollum. For the premiere, Wellington has renamed itself the Middle of Middle-earth after the fictional land created by J.R.R. Tolkien. It's a much smaller book, isn't it, than Lord of the Rings? So it's interesting that they're going to make 3 films.
Yes, that's a good point.
You won't get all of it in the first film. So just keep you coming back for
more
more.
thinking time for the actors, possibly.
Yeah, possibly.
8:10, those are the main stories.
The phone hacking scandal shook public confidence in the press, left dozens of devastated victims in its wake, and led to the downfall of a newspaper which had been in print since the 1840s.
The debate since then centred on whether the British press has been allowed to get away with unacceptable behaviour for too long, and whether some form of statutory regulation is needed to protect people's privacy and make sure that journalists no longer overstep the mark.
Well, many in government oppose the idea of a press regulation law, and among them is the Conservative Conor Burns.
He's organised a letter backed by a cross-party group of more than 80 MPs and peers, warning the Prime Minister that any statutory controls would pose the greatest threat to press freedom in 300 years.
The Millie Dowler example and many other harrowing examples that came forward that Lord Justice Leveson has looked into happened because of people breaking the law. We need a system of robust regulation that is fair, that is independent, and that makes newspapers think before they behave in certain ways. I am passionately of the view that a free speech and a free press is the cornerstone of a free society, and we temper that at our peril.
Well, let's put that point to Hugh Grant. He's campaigned heavily for tighter press regulation. Joins us now from London. Morning, Hugh.
Good morning.
Yeah, statutory regulation. So some people are arguing that, in essence, if you have some kind of law backing up control of the press, you are threatening the very freedom that the press is trying to defend.
Well, no one is arguing for statutory regulation that I've ever heard of. They're arguing for independent regulation underpinned by statute, which is a very, very different beast, and it's desperately important that the BBC gets that straight. What people are campaigning for is an end to newspapers being able to regulate themselves, marking their own homework, because that is what has resulted in the kind of abuses of people like the Dowlers, the McCanns, Christopher Jeffries. That's effectively what's resulted in the bribing of the police and over-influence on government.
All right, what should this statutory underpinning then consist of, in your view?
Of an independent regulator. So you have this new regulator that's not just run by the press for the press, but has an independent panel on it, and it has to have a little bit of statutory underpinning. Otherwise, newspapers won't join it. They'll do what Desmond did with the Express Group and just say, "Who are you? I'm not joining." And after all, Desmond and the Express Group were one of the worst perpetrators of these abuses.
Right, so some kind of law then to make sure that the papers sign up to it. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying, and that's according to a recent YouGov poll. Well, I say recent, just literally in the last few days. Over 80% of the British public agree that that is now necessary. I believe it's a higher figure than that have stopped believing that the newspaper barons should be able to regulate themselves.
Just clarify for us then, because we heard Conor Burns mention it again there. Phone hacking is already against the law.
Yeah.
Now, why would introducing a new law prevent or have prevented phone hacking taking place?
Well, of course, this is about a lot more than phone hacking. It's about blackmail, bribery, all manner of abuses that we heard about at Leveson. And the law was found to be wanting because the police didn't do their job. And there were great questions asked about why they didn't do their job and about brown paper envelopes, etc. And you also have to ask why government chose to look the other way for years and years, well, 40 years effectively, while the law was broken on an industrial scale.
And yet you're
it's
asking
really
for
it's really
a new,
because those
new
newspapers
law.
held the government to ransom because of their power.
But you are asking for, I mean, already there has been a breach of the law, but you want more law in order to
the newspapers always have had a code of practice. The problem is, which is, so you have the law, you have the criminal law, you have the civil law, and then you have a regulator. Every industry that has the power to harm people's lives has a regulator. The only regulator in this country, the only industry in this country, which is allowed to regulate itself, is the newspaper industry. And so we're saying we need a proper regulator, an independent regulator, meaningful, that will need some statute to oblige newspapers to sign up to it.
Yeah, but how does having a press regulator stop the press becoming too powerful and leaning on the government, which seemed to be what you were saying a minute ago?
Well, if newspapers are allowed to break the law and break their own code of conduct, they can, for instance, they're able to gather information on individuals, on politicians that are not necessarily in the public interest. And you have situations like the Culture Select Committee over the last few years being whispered to by newspapers saying, if you bring us before this committee, we will expose your private life. And not things in the public interest, just things like poor old Chris Bryant didn't want to be outed and was outed by The Sun just because they made Rebecca Brooks come to a parliamentary committee.
I wonder what you think about. You've talked about, we've addressed the issue of phone hacking. There have been many examples of intrusion and, as you say, behaviour which has led to individuals being besmirched, maligned in the newspapers. I wonder about simple remedies. The fact that we heard from Anne Diamond earlier saying that it's very frustrating for people that when some abuse is committed against them in the press, that an apology is printed then perhaps on page 20, small apology. Whether there couldn't be a simple solution to something like that. If you splash as a paper something on the front page, the apology has to have the same status.
Yeah, well, I think that's absolutely right. And one of the problems with relying on law is that law is to get these things. If you've been libelled, for instance, is that the law is very expensive. And it would be, one of the things we hope for from the Leveson report is that he'll recommend a cheaper form of redress for people who find themselves in the situation of the McCanns or the Watson family, that they can get redress without the expensive business of the law. And that's one of the things that
So are you suggesting
is
that
discussed in this documentary that I agreed to take part in tonight on Channel 4.
So the independent regulator that you are hoping is the suggestion, with the backing of law, would be something that would force newspapers to do just that?
Yeah, it would stop them. There's many things that fall outside the remit of law, which is still, most people would think, indecent. I mean, only this year you saw pictures of, there was a young boy tragically killed in a coach crash in Switzerland in March. And despite their family's requests for privacy, you had the family homes surrounded by press. You had pictures of the little boy's 9-year-old sister in tears, ready to lay flowers at the crash site, taken with a long lens, printed in the Daily Mail, the Sun and the Daily Telegraph, and pictures of the boy himself taken off his Facebook site and published without the parents' permission, which is against the Code of Conduct. But the Code of Conduct of the press at the moment is openly flouted.
All right.
It is absurd that the Daily Mail printed those pictures, and the chairman of the finance board of the PCC is Paul Dacre,
Right.
the editor of the Daily Mail.
All right. In your view, then, say that there was a regulator with the statutory underpinning, what would the sanction be then for any newspaper that says, actually, no, we're not going to sign up to this?
Well, just as the newspapers are subject to the law in many areas, like whether it's contempt of court or whether it's libel, obviously there's legal sanction, and I think that is something that the public now has that backs. 80% of them do. It's on the front page of the Guardian.
Yeah, but I want your view as to what that sanction, in your view, should be if there was a new regulator with the statutory underpinning. What would you like to see happen to papers which didn't sign up?
Meaningful fines in some cases. In other cases, as you just discussed, meaningful apologies with the same size and prominence as the original piece.
Okay.
There's all kinds of sanctions.
Hugh Grant, thanks very much.
Pleasure.
So the Prime Minister will receive that report at lunchtime today,
Yep.
and it will go public tomorrow.
The time now, 19 minutes past 8. If you're writing and directing your first film, and you just happen to be the son of the actress Charlotte Rampling, who better to perform in it than your mum? Later, Charlotte and her son Barnaby Southcombe will be here to talk about their new psychological thriller called I, Anna.
6 years ago, I thought we were going to hear the music then. The iconic music. 6 years ago, H.G. Wells' sci-fi novel The War of the Worlds turned into a stage musical. It's back again this year with some high-tech changes, and Jason Donovan and its creator Jeff Wayne are going to be joining us this morning to tell us more.
That's all very dramatic music for Alex. Morning, Alex.
Good morning. The weather's not that dramatic, thankfully. An improving picture with our weather, as it has been over the past 24 hours, gradually turning drier, and for many places we'll actually see some sunshine today. But it is cold outside, and it's not completely dry. This is the radar. For the past few days it's been covered in rain. Last night the rain was particularly focused across northeast England. Just a few showers continuing to feed in here, but of course the ground is saturated, so any extra rain isn't welcome. But those showers are going to continue to push their way further southwards, affecting parts of Lincolnshire and East Anglia. Across much of the southeast, though, it is a dry morning, and even a bit of sunshine here and there. Certainly further west, plenty of sunshine across parts of southwest England and much of Wales. Just a small chance of a shower hitting West Cornwall and western parts of Pembrokeshire. But most of Wales dry. Great news across North Wales. However, there are still 2 severe flood warnings in force here. Across Northern Ireland, it's dry, it's bright, it's a cold start today, as it is across Scotland. Temperatures have been down below freezing, starting to rise gradually now with the help of a little bit of sunshine. A few scattered showers across northern Scotland. During the day, we'll keep a few showers here, and we'll keep those showers across the extreme east of England, but pushing further south, more affecting Lincolnshire and Norfolk rather than North Yorkshire. Elsewhere, though, it is generally a fine day. Decent spells of sunshine, allowing everything to dry out just a little bit. It's not going to be warm, though. Feeling cold at temperatures 3 to 8 degrees Celsius, and feeling even colder than that when you add on that brisk wind affecting many central and eastern parts. That wind will continue to feed a few showers along the east coast overnight tonight. A little bit of snow over the tops of the North York moors. But for the majority, it's a dry night with clear spells. That blue hue becoming much more evident on the map. A much more widespread frost tonight. Some towns and cities will stay above 0, but for many,